PR for my group. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wondered how you got picked. I figured it's because you're such a good speaker. When I saw your slides, I figured that was the reason.
I'm sure that's also the case.
Maybe not, but.
All right, so here's a laser pointer. I want to welcome, is it Elena? Is
Elena.
that how you say it?
Yeah, my name is-
Chung, who is going to talk to us about OSU's awesomeness in clean coal, which you guys have had some breakthroughs recently.
Yes, we
According
had
to
some,
OSU Today.
pretty much some really big milestones that we met. So then, hopefully, we're on this path of commercialization.
Yeah, we're rooting for you.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank
I
you.
mean, I think the time frame is a little long, but
Still, anything you
probably
can do
past
to help.
my
We appreciate
years here. But can I flip through using
That thing won't work.
this thing,
That thing,
or do I just use this?
maybe just use that, because
Okay.
the other thing I'm not sure if you need a dongle for.
Okay. All right. So I'm Elena Chung. I'm a third-year graduate student from the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering. And so before I get started, I like to talk about how I got into this. So really where it started was when I was growing up, sustainable was never a term we used. And then when I entered undergrad, this term sustainable started becoming more and more popular. So, and I've always been a environmentalist, and I've always been really interested in conserving the environment while making it long-term cohesive, or making the environment cohesive, living in an environment where it's cohesive with our lives. So long-term, how do we keep things sustainable? How do we develop sustainability? And so I started taking classes in sustainability, and it's actually funny, I was taking sustainable development, sustainability, sustainable engineering. So all these were all over campus, in political science, environmental sciences, and in engineering. And so the second part of your course, Energy and Society, actually didn't come to me right away. But because I'm easily bribed by traveling and a free plane ticket, so I was part of this sustainable club called Engineers Without Borders, and I was given the opportunity to develop sustainable not technologies, but sustainable solutions to everyday problems for underdeveloped areas. And our project was in Brazil. And so I was able to convince a recruiter during a career fair that I had an amazing experience in Brazil. So then he sent me to the marshes of Egypt. And I was actually doing a project on trying to quantify the CO2 emissions of an oil company in the Nile. So this is kind of where this light bulb, for me, in energy, like how do we take fossil fuels, which produce a lot of greenhouse gases and isn't actually sustainable, and make it sustainable, right? And so that's just kind of the backstory of why I'm here. And so recently there's been a lot of news in the Lantern, the Dispatch, Fox News about the research that we do in my lab. And we work on clean coal technologies. And so before I jump into this, I think it's really good to get an idea of the global landscape, about this current status of the coal industry, how technological development contributes this, and how the research we do in clean coal adds to this larger picture, right? And so I like to go down all the way to the basics. And so this is my electric bill from October. And I had just moved, so it jumped from $20 to $127, right? But the key point of this is to look at the 461 kilowatt hours that I spent for the month of October. And so if you take this out, so this is for 1 month, then you multiply it by 12, so that's about roughly 10 times that. And but then you do it for every person in this room, then you multiply it out to every person on this campus, and you can see where I'm going with this, is that our energy consumption is growing and growing, and our demand is continuously growing with every person consuming energy. in the form of electricity. And this only makes a small part of our Ohio energy consumption in terms of residential use. So then we have to take into consideration the transportation, the industrial use, and the commercial use. So in a given year for 2010, we spent over 1 million megawatts. So megawatts versus kilowatts of energy, electricity, right? So this sort of puts into perspective our growing energy demands. And so how does coal play a role? In Ohio, we predominantly generate electricity using coal. And so this talk is about the future of coal. So in the general energy landscape, the United States Energy Information Administration produces these really nice reports projecting our energy consumption and energy use to currently 2040. And so as I was saying, our energy demands is continuously rising. And there's no one energy source that can meet this demand. So every energy fuel type, be it natural gas, biofuels, renewables, or oil, makes up a piece of this, pie, you could say. And most of these are increasing. And if they're not increasing, they're actually just stagnating, right? So the projections say coal is going from 20 to 90%. Not a huge dip, but definitely not a huge decrease. So in order to meet our demands, everything will be used, right? Will have to be used. And so this brings us to coal. And the US has a long history with coal, with the development of the steam turbine. And basically that sparked the Industrial Revolution. Coal has been heavily used in the US. We are the second largest producer of coal after China. And currently we have a lot of reserves. So another key aspect of coal is that we have a lot of reserves. And this means that we can actually be energy independent if we make use of our coal reserves. But this is not to say that we shouldn't use natural gas or all the other fuel types that could make us even more energy independent. But it plays a huge role. And we currently produce as much as we consume of coal. And we are a net exporter of coal. We don't export a lot of other energy sources, but we do export coal. And we don't import very much coal. So we don't really take coal from any other country. So again, this emphasis on energy independence. And so, but to bring it down to the state level and to us here, Ohio and coal has also had a really long and colorful history because of where we're located and the amount of coal reserves in Ohio. I'm not from Ohio, but the first three things I think about when I think about Ohio is football. What else did I think about? Oh, how you guys would swing the elections.
Yeah.
And coal. And so currently, Ohio is the 7th in the nation with coal reserves. And most of our electricity that we use today in Ohio, 80% of it at least, comes from coal. And we have at least, I think, depending on where you get your sources, there's 100 to 300 years left of coal. And this also highly depends on how much we consume of it and the demands for coal. But most of our electricity in Ohio comes from coal. Some of it comes from natural gas, some of it from nuclear, and then other renewables. I know in most of the projections, natural gas will increase and coal will decrease a little, but coal will remain a primary energy source for electricity. So I like to go back to my electric bill again. But essentially, how does coal get to electricity? And so coal is combusted to steam, and the steam drives the steam turbine to produce electricity. That's really simplistic, right? And in the U.S., predominantly 42% derives from coal. But in Ohio, that's upwards to 80%. So you can see the huge reliance on coal in Ohio. And but this gets to the bigger point. So we use coal because it's abundant, it's cheap, it's local, and its potential to convert coal to usable energy is relatively efficient. I think it's 35 to 40, high 40s, depending on what type of power plant you use and what type of coal you use. So there's a lot of different grades, and there's a lot of different types of power plants. But that's relatively efficient for an energy source. But what's wrong with coal, right? And so there's a lot of environmental concerns. And I never foresaw myself getting into the coal industry or the coal research. But, the reason I wanted to start working in this industry was because I have this deep belief that innovations and technological developments can produce change. And long term, we should try to address these environmental concerns. And one way is through technology. So what are the actual environmental concerns with coal? So first is coal mining. We all know it's dirty, right? You see all the black pictures of coal miners covered in soot and coal dust. And so both surface and underground mining have environmental concerns. There's a huge footprint, and during this mining process, there's a potential of polluting our clean waterways, destroying the natural environment. And then the second step of the coal industry is coal combustion for power generation. It's also used for other purposes, such as producing steel, but in this talk, I'll focus on electricity generation because that affects us, right? So coal combustion is also really dirty, and it produces a lot of emissions, particularly SOx, or SO2, sulfur dioxide, that is shown to produce acid rain and affect our respiratory system. And then NOx, which causes smog and respiratory issues. Particulate matters, and so that's on the micron size, and this also causes smog, which I'm not sure if you guys know what smog is, but when you fly into LA, you'll see smog at certain times of the day. It's this huge cloudiness that is associated with large cities or near industrial areas. And then there's also mercury and heavy metals, which are toxics and pollutants. And you don't want them in your waterways, and you don't want to be, because they affect our system, our health. And lastly, greenhouse gases, which is where the focus of today's talk will be. So again, what is clean coal? So actually, clean coal started focusing on technological solutions for SOx, NOx, and particulate matter. Historically, clean coal was focused on developing technologies for removing SOx, NOx, and particulate matter. And it also plays a part in our environmental regulations. So with the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, which started around the 1960s, late 1960s, people started paying attention to trying to clean up coal and trying to clean up our airways and our waterways. And then there's a focus on conservation. How can you reclaim the land from coal mining and reuse it or restore it back to its natural state? And so all these ideas, I guess, are part of this clean coal concept. But today, more of the clean coal is focused on greenhouse gas emissions. So I used to do research in climate change. And that was something I did in undergrad. And we've all seen it, the IPCC reports and the EPA reports about how greenhouse gases, if we continue to let them go uncontrolled, could lead to worsening of global warming and global climate change. And so how do we solve this issue? For SOx and NOx, I think carbon control has been following the SOx and NOx method. The SOx and NOx started being concerned because people started worrying about acid rain and smog and visible environmental threats, which led to regulations and technological developments to control it. And so this greenhouse gas technologies are following a similar route, except it's a little bit more difficult, it's a little bit more complicated, the issue is a little bit more harder to envision because we don't actually physically see the effects right now. We don't see acid rain eroding our buildings, we don't see the smog. So it's a little bit more difficult to understand, I think. So the two approaches are by regulation and then by technological developments. And so there's carbon regulation is currently what's been more political, more legislative issues. People are debating whether we should have a carbon cap and trade or a carbon tax of some sort in order to incentivize polluters to take care of the greenhouse gas emissions, right? But another aspect is in this technology development, and that's in so it's actually called CCUS, which is carbon capture, utilization, and storage or sequestration, depending on what source you're reading. But essentially, this is the idea of taking that CO2 from the power plant, capturing it, which is the first step, and then either using it for some purpose or storing it and sequestrating it. So we actually emit so much CO2 that this option will probably be overshadowed by storage and sequestration right now, because it would be really hard to use this route currently. At least that's how the technologies are developing. And so my group actually focuses on carbon capture. We don't study carbon utilization or carbon sequestration, and because it's such a big issue, there's so many different technologies. So I'll talk a lot more about carbon capture technologies in the future slides. But a little bit of a background is why not adopt the CCUS technologies now? And a lot of that is because the technology isn't ready, or and also the again back to, do we need to do this, and who's going to oversee this, and so it goes back down to there's no concrete regulation or legislation or risk mitigation strategies currently in place. There's no cohesive decision about who will the largest emitters, should the largest emitters be regulating less the people, the countries that emit less, right? And so there's a lot of debate in that. And then the technology, and then there's issues with the technology. So there's technical challenges, there are economic challenges, and there are efficiency challenges. And I think this goes with any technology that you want to bring to commercialization. For it to actually be implemented, all of these factors have to be considered and have to actually make sense in order for someone to actually be incentivized to adopt these practices. And so that's what a lot of our work focuses on, is trying to make carbon capture technologies more economical, more efficient, and more less technically challenged, like more simplified, more integrated. So I'm going to really quickly, briefly go over carbon utilization and carbon sequestration because I think it's important to understand the technologies or the research that's going into these fields because it is the 2/3 of the whole picture, right? So carbon utilization is trying to use that CO2 for another purpose. And currently, the most popular method is enhanced oil recovery. And that's where you take the CO2 that's been captured and you pump it down into existing wells, these are oil wells, to recover more oil. So I think research has shown that it can recover up to 20% more oil from conventional oil drilling. And so this, if it economically makes sense, would drive oils and gas producers to be more interested in CCUS technologies, right? And then another utilization is carbon dioxide transformation, and that's converting the CO2 into something more usable. And so there's a lot of ideas currently, mostly in chemicals, petrochemical, electrochemical products, and biological products. You can reform it to syngas, produce inorganic carbonates that you could more easily store the CO2 if they're in this mineral form. And then CO2 is also used, we know CO2 is used for, it can be used in fire extinguishers. It can be used for carbonating our beverages. It can also be used to part of the photosynthesis process to promote algae growth. So that's where CO2 can be used for biofuels. So this would be another avenue to use the CO2 rather than just storing it in the ground. But a lot of this is under research still. And so the other option, because we do produce so much CO2, we can't use all of it. So the other option is to store it. And this is the storage and so that's basically injecting supercritical CO2, which is CO2 that's been pressurized and cooled into a fluid state, so it'll be easier to handle, back into empty underground reservoirs. So I think there's a lot of large-scale testing done, mostly funded by the DOE, in oil reservoirs, gas reservoirs, and saline aquifers. And so this is one option. But today I'm going to talk about carbon capture technologies, which is where most of our research is. So carbon capture technologies are divided into where you capture this, the CO2 basically. Is it post the, or how the coal is processed and then where you capture the CO2. So there's post-combustion capture, which means that you allow the coal to combust, and then you take the flue gas stream and you capture the CO2 from that. And then pre-combustion is where you gasify the coal. Instead of combusting it, you gasify it to form syngas, which is a combination of carbon monoxide and hydrogen. And then you capture, you react the carbon monoxide with a little bit more water, and you push that reaction to the CO to form CO2. And then you can separate it, chug it into later. And then there's oxy-combustion capture, which is where, so typically combustion is the reaction of air and coal, right? And in oxy-combustion, you take the oxygen out of the air and react that with the coal, so, and then capture the CO2 from that. And there are disadvantages and advantages of all of these. No one solution is 100% perfect, and I would certainly not say that our technology is 100% perfect either. So, but the government has been really interested in developing CO2 capture technologies because it's the first step, right? They also put a lot of funding into carbon utilization and carbon sequestration. But for this topic, I'll focus on CO2 capture. So this is the DOE's timeline of technological development on CO2 capture technologies. And essentially their goal is to at least capture 90% of the CO2. I would say not all of these solutions can do that. And then do it in an economical way so that the increase of, so a lot of reports will always report a COE, which is cost of electricity. And the goal is to reduce this increase in cost of electricity. Because if we do nothing, really, if we do nothing, it's obviously not going to cost more. And so any change, anything we adopt will add an additional cost. And which is why it's basically not adopted right away, right? Because of this increase in costs, the coal industry doesn't have an incentive to adopt any of these technologies. And so if you can decrease the cost of electricity, and the goal for PC is pulverized coal fire, and that's the traditional way of, or the conventional way of firing coal to produce electricity, is in a PC pulverized coal fired power plant. If you can make sure the increase in cost is less than 35%, that is the goal of the Department of Energy. And so in this timeline, the most current technologies are here in amine solvents, physical solvents, and cryogenic technologies. But we study chemical looping, which is one of the more cost reducing technologies, but has one of the longest time for development. And so this is actually a natural progression for my lab because my professor, Dr. Fan, he started actually in the other clean coal technologies, which is the SOx removal, the NOx removal, the particulate matter removal. And so it became a natural progression to study greenhouse gas emissions removal from coal. And so the research in our lab has been ongoing in chemical looping for the past 15 years. And so all our recent use has been on that technology. We don't really study a lot of these, but it's really important to know about them. So I'm going to really quickly go over them. Oh, and one thing to note is that all of these are divided by the post, pre, and oxy-combustion. Chemical looping is depending on how you use it, it can be considered a pre-combustion or oxy-combustion system.
All of those produce heat, though, right? So even oxy-combustion, that one, there aren't actual flames, is that correct?
No, yeah, there's no actual.
But it still produces heat, the process,
Yes, if it's.
to make the steam.
Yeah, if it's. Yeah. So this might be a lot, but I'll go over it really quickly and briefly, and this is more for your own reference. So I'll go into pre-combustion capture, which is where you gasify the coal to form syngas, and then you can capture the CO2. So the main ideas are absorption, adsorption, and physical separation. And the difference between absorption and adsorption, so let me just explain it. Absorption is where it's more of a surface reaction, whereas adsorption is more of a bulk. So absorbing something is no, sorry, I mixed that up. Opposite. So adsorption is where you physically on the surface would like sort of adhere to it, and then it would let go when, depending on the conditions. So you would stick CO2 onto your surface and then let it go based on how you change the conditions, right? So you can swing things. And absorption is where you physically dissolve it or chemically dissolve it, the CO2, and then you push that reaction back in order to release it. And so there's been a lot of research in pre-combustion carbon capture. So these are the solvent absorption technologies. There's ionic liquids, MEA, which is also used in post-combustion, chilled ammonia, which is also used in post-combustion, Selexol, Rectisol, there's a lot of names. But essentially the takeaway is these are pre-combustion capture technologies. And I think one of the things to get from this is that there are a lot of technologies out there. There is a lot of research going on in carbon capture technologies. So which one will win out? It's hard to say. I don't really think any solution will be singular in carbon capture. So
Can you tier them? Like, is there a way to
oh.
Do one and then do another and then do another, like on top of each other? Do you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, so you could
you do physical solvents and chemical looping. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I obviously have no idea what either of them are at this point, but
You probably could, but it also depends on how you modify it. So if you retrofit a power plant, or if you repower a current coal-fired power plant, or if you need to construct a whole new system. So I think it highly depends on how you. I think it would be a little difficult to combine these two together
sure.
because they're two different processes. Because you gasify the coal versus
Right.
you just combust the coal, right? So there would be some difficulties, but I don't see why not. And a lot of these technologies, you could probably do them sequentially. I would. That'd be interesting, actually. Economically, probably not.
Yeah, exactly.
But the economics is a whole different story, and I think that would be the driving reason why someone would adopt a system or not is the economics, because at the end of the day, it's about the profits for the coal industry, so this is the second level of those pre-combustion capture technologies. So actually, we do research in calcium chemical looping, but today I'm going to talk about iron chemical looping, which is what's been in the news. And so this is a type of chemical absorption method. And then there's also metal organic frameworks, which is also possible in post-combustion capture, and this pressure swing absorption process. So, and then there are people in our department, not our group, that actually do membrane separation. So this is where you send in CO2 and you physically, not chemically, separate the CO2 from the flue gas stream. Okay, so there are advantages and disadvantages. Most of them have to do with economics and the costs, the capital costs associated with building a system. And then the post-combustion, a lot of it is the energy penalties, the heat loss related to it, and then handling the solids, or handling whatever you're reacting with it, right? So I'll show you. But then there's also advantages of the system. So I was mentioning pulverized coal or PC power plants, and traditionally coal is mixed with air, right, to produce flue gas and the heat in the form of steam. And so the most basic current carbon capture technology is this monoethanol amine. So we call it amine scrubbing for short, or MEA scrubbing. And this is a post-combustion method. So the only issue right now, back in that roadmap, is that it's very costly. There's a 30% energy penalty, and that means, so what does that really mean? It means that if you put it in a system, it decreases the efficiency of all these coal-fired power plants. So the question is, why would a coal-fired power plant want to adopt a system that would lower their efficiency, basically lower their electricity generation potential? And so that's why the new emerging technologies always compare ourselves to the amine process. So for people doing research in amine scrubbing, we kind of bash them. But it's the benchmark goal so the DOE makes all the comparisons to the amine scrubbing process, because it would increase the cost of electricity because of the economics. And this is because the CO2 separation is very, very costly. And so another post-combustion capture system is the chilled ammonia process. So like I said, all of these are compared to the MEA amine scrubbing process. So this is less cost intensive, and the energy penalty is less. But again, what do you do with all this ammonia? And then these are the emerging technologies in post-combustion capture, which is ionic liquids, which is a salt that you react with. Currently, it's a little bit costly because of some of these materials are a little bit costly to produce. Membranes, the same reason, they're expensive. And this would be more, so you would need to be able to provide pressure, and in economics for these chemical processes, pressure is a big driving force, because if you can't create that pressure, your economics are not good. And then meta-organic frameworks is a really new emerging technology, but again, it's very unclear about the large scale up. So a lot of these are on lab scale or bench scale, which means you walk into a chemistry lab and that's the size of the current technology, and that's why scale up will make or break these technologies. Okay, and then I want to talk about oxy-combustion capture. So the principle is, the reason why conventional combustion is costly for CO2 separation is because you have gas separated with gas, which is nitrogen and CO2, which are two gases, and it's very difficult. It's not impossible to separate these two. But in an oxy-fuel combustion type, it's much easier if you can separate steam with CO2, because steam, you can cool it down and it becomes water, so it becomes a gas-liquid separation, and that's very easy. Or in comparison, very easy. So that's the overall principle, which is also the principle of the work we do, which is chemical looping. So the only issue with an oxy-combustion system is that you provide instead of reacting coal with air, you react coal with oxygen, pure oxygen. So the issue here, the economics for, like I said, separating nitrogen from oxygen is really difficult. You're separating two gases. So you would need a ASU, which is air separation unit, and those are very costly and energy intensive. So in an oxy-combustion process, that's the big disadvantage. But overall, it's actually easy. The concept is quite simple, right? And you can easily retrofit or repower existing plants. So this is oxygen transport membranes as a type, but it's very new. And essentially uses a membrane to take the air and pull out the oxygen. It's very similar to chemical looping, but it uses a membrane instead. So the only issue here is it's hard to say how costly the membrane will be and how it will be scaled. So this brings us to chemical looping, which I said was a pre-combustion. It can be considered a pre-combustion process, or it can be considered an oxy-combustion capture process. So in this, so the chemistry is actually very, very simple. So the overall idea is to, so I've used methane here, but you can think of this as any hydrocarbon. So you can think methane, propane, syngas, which is carbon monoxide with hydrogen, or coal, right? And you basically react it with oxygen, coal combustion. But the oxygen comes from a metal oxide. So I was mentioning we use calcium for a different type of chemical looping. But here we use iron, which is, so iron has different oxidation states, and this might get a little complicated. But essentially, if you think of iron, you can think of something like rust. So when when steel oxidizes, it forms a rust layer, right? So that's because it reacts with oxygen. So essentially, we are utilizing that reaction of oxygen with iron. We're taking advantage of that system, so we can reduce it and oxidize it in this reaction, or in our reaction, which is why we use iron, because it has that potential to provide oxygen. So when you take rust and you reduce it down back to the metal iron, like elemental iron, it releases that oxygen, and that's where we take our oxygen from. So instead of trying to separate air, basically separate nitrogen and oxygen, we don't need to do that. We can use the oxygen from these so-called rust particles. I don't want to call them rust because they're not really rust, but they're iron-based. You have a question?
So I'm from the West.
Yeah.
And lots and lots of red rock.
Yeah.
Obviously from that. Can that, could you use it from that type of thing as well, or could it only be from the metal?
No, that's exactly the point. So we actually, there's been a lot of testing with whether you can use the metal oxide. It can be a mineral. So there's a mineral called ilmenite, which is an iron titanium based with silica and alumina. Hematite, which is almost pure, which is what most of that red rock. So I've actually put minerals into our system. So that's the cool thing of our system, is that you can react it with any metal oxide. But the base of it is iron oxide. And so it's really simple chemistry. So because most of it is exothermic, the overall reaction is exothermic, you produce heat, which is where it plays into the role of traditional coal combustion. So the overall reaction is our carbon base with the oxygen from the metal oxide produces CO2 and only water. So it makes CO2 separation very easy because you separate a liquid and a gas. So here's a little better visual of it. So the cool thing about chemical looping at Ohio State is we can also produce hydrogen. And hydrogen, I'm not sure if you guys discussed it, but can be used for fuel cells, and so you can produce heat for electricity, and you could potentially produce hydrogen. And we can use different feedstocks. So it doesn't have to be coal; it could be natural gas, actually syngas, biomass. And so how does this play a role in the traditional power plant, coal-fired power plant? So in a traditional coal-fired power plant, there's a boiler. And this is where the fuel and the air mix together in one reactor to produce fuel, the flue gas here, which is a mixture of stuff. But in our system, it's 2 reactors, so this would replace this boiler. The fuel and air are always separated, so they never mix. only the metal oxide is transferred, so the iron is transferred between the two reactors. And if you can see the chemistry, there's an oxidation reduction happening. So in the air reactor, the metal oxide is oxidized so that it can be regenerated to go back into the fuel reactor, so it can continuously produce that oxygen. Because the coal will be sent in and it will be reacted with the metal oxide, so it takes away the oxygen, and then you're depleted of oxygen. So then you take the iron and bring it back into the air reactor, regenerate it, so that you can continuously have this loop, which is why it's called chemical looping. So at the same time, during the reaction, you produce CO2 and water, and then in the air reactor, you just produce air.
So you have an exothermic reaction then, and it's enough
To do that?
Yeah, to like run the turbines and stuff.
Yes. We only really research this process. We don't really research beyond.
Okay.
But that's where the scale up for real use would be tested.
The heat is produced in the reaction in the fuel reactor, though.
Yes, yeah, in this reactor. Yeah. So why chemical looping? You can easily separate it, and then the amount of usable energy is increased because there's less energy loss, so it's more efficient than other processes.
Could you go back 2 slides real quick?
Yeah.
So, what is the little red lines? Is that the?
Oh, so we had to provide heat.
Is that
Oh.
heat? That's
Yeah.
secret chemical engineering language.
We had to provide heat.
Okay.
So there's this, traditionally you do autothermal, so you can recycle the heat back that you produce and recycle it back into your system but yes, so our system, it's not that simple. It's
Right.
the chemistry is very simple, but you do need to put that extra energy in, and that's usually, we currently don't do it autothermally, autothermally means taking the heat from our reaction. Commercially, that's the plan. We currently use heaters, but that's more of a demonstration, right?
Research.
And so you can't use pure iron oxide. You have to mix it with something else. So the important key factors of chemical looping is how the challenges. So this simple chemistry has been known for decades, right? But there's no incentive to actually. So the original use of chemical looping was to produce CO2 for the beverage industry, carbonation, right? But they had difficulties developing a reactor system that would work, and difficulty picking out an oxygen carrier, the one that donates the oxygen. And so a lot of the work in our lab is a lot of my work is trying to develop this perfect oxygen carrier. So this is just.
What have you found is the best? Because you're saying that the powder doesn't perform very well.
Oh, if you mix it with other
Just mixing
supports.
it?
Yeah.
And keeping it as a powder or as a pellet?
So it depends on the reactor system. So if you have a fluidized bed, you typically use a powder form. If you use the type of bed we use, we usually use larger pellets like that. Which I don't know if you read. Apparently, we call it beads. in all our news articles, we've been trying to describe it. So the reason we prefer not powder is because during this process, the coal becomes ash. So when you burn coal, you form ash. And the coal is already in powder form. The ash is also in the powder form. And then when you need to separate the iron oxide from the ash, it would be very difficult if they were
That makes sense.
not the same. If they're the same size, yeah. So this is sort of
But there would be more surface area with the powder, though, wouldn't there?
yes. So then your reaction would be better. So
It's just a difficult process.
yeah, you have to
Find the right pattern.
trade-offs,
Or-
yeah.
Yeah.
So the benefits of chemical looping is that we can use syngas, natural gas, coal or biomass, So the fuel potentials are endless. It just has to be carbon-based. And so then I'm going to talk about in my remaining 5 minutes, I'll talk about the two processes we have, which is the coal direct. So we actually take coal directly in the powdered form. Most people gasify their coal before they send it in. And we have the gasified version, which is the syngas chemical looping. So this would be where coal direct chemical looping would go in. This is where the boiler
We're
would
looking at a current system or your system retrofitted or?
retrofitted into a
Okay.
system. So this would be like where the boiler would traditionally be, and this is where your pulverized coal goes, and you would
So you'd have to completely replace that portion?
that portion of the power plant, yeah.
Okay.
So for this, but let's get through these. So this is our actual subpilot 250 kilowatt thermal unit.
It's over on West Campus, right?
That's over on West Campus.
Is it right next to the reactor or something?
No, these are standalone reactors, so that we don't really
No,
do.
I mean, is it next to the, I'm talking about location.
Oh, it's next to the nuclear reactor.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
One
it's
of
very
those buildings.
Yeah, because it's very, very. We need a lot of space. I don't know if you can see these are stories tall, and so the white insulated part is where our reactor system is. So it's essentially this part. So we obviously don't have this half, but we only are focused on developing the chemical looping part.
Do you
So-
do you think guys would ever go into researching that part as well?
Yes.
As how it,
Yes,
Okay.
we do. Because although it's probably not going to be my life or my graduate life,
in your lifetime, just maybe not.
it would be my lifetime, just not my graduate life.
Yeah.
And then similarly, syngas. So the syngas process is the one where I'll show you where it would be tested actually. So it all started from a very little reactor. So this is that big. To a little, the fixed bed is like this big, to a bench scale, which is that big. And then the subpilot is the 3-story one. And then it goes into this is our current construction of the gasified coal system, which is the syngas unit. It's going to be a 250 kilowatt thermal unit built in Alabama under the Department of Energy's National Carbon Capture Center. And so it's a center that Southern Company hosts all these experimental ideas. They provide the gasified coal, which is the syngas stream. And so we just take a slipstream of their syngas and we can test on a larger scale. So that should be starting in September. So you might hear more news about us. So how does this compare to, so this slide shows how a CDCl process and a CDCl process of hydrogen compares to a conventional hydrogen process. You can see that you can actually produce more hydrogen efficiently. But this is simulation, so not experimental. And then, so we've been working with Babcock and Wilcox, who are our commercialization partners, and we plan to. So they will use their traditional coal-fired power plants to actually test this system.
Oh, cool.
So that's where it comes in. And so they've done the techno-economic studies. I don't want to bore you, but basically we concluded that if you replace the boiler part, this is where the traditional boiler would go, we only have an increase in cost of electricity of 33%, which meets the DOE's goal of 35% or less. So that's the exciting thing about our research and why we think this would be a viable technology. And so that's pretty much.
Put down go back one. You said you have the 99% capture then as well.
Yes.
With that, right? And
Yeah.
that's compared to the other ones, that's
0%.
Yeah, that's significant,
Yeah.
Yes.
obviously. So not only have you met the goal, but you've basically cleaned it.
Yes. Yes. So that's essentially. Yeah, we're not going to claim 100%. It'll be very difficult for any system to claim 100% carbon capture, but that's what's kind of cool and why. Basically, my conclusion is that I think it's really important to get into technology development and innovation, and it's the only way things change. We make things progress and change. I don't think coal is the only solution to our energy demands. All of the above solution. Chemical looping is only a small part of the whole carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration picture, and so all of these things need to be in place before something will be fully adopted, and I think that's where research comes in, where research is really important to confirm these proof of concepts and scale them up to commercialization. So hopefully that's what you learned. This is definitely not an individual thing. This is a really old picture of our group, but these are the updated group members. So I think that's the awesome thing about doing research is that our research is team-based. Everyone specializes in one aspect of the whole bigger picture, but we can't do it without smart minds, and you need a lot of minds to get things moving. So, thank you for.
Thank you. Wow.
Went a little over, so I'm sorry.
Oh, you had some questions, which is good.
Yeah, do you guys have questions?
Yeah.
Any more?
Yeah, a couple more. Could the process be used? Because South Africa is doing a liquefaction of their coal
Coals, yes.
and stuff like that.
So that is
Fuel, for car, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so China leads in that. China and South Africa are very interested in pushing coal to liquids. So I think it's called CTL technologies. And so the cool thing about chemical looping is that I said it was fuel flexible, but it's also the byproducts are very flexible too. So we can modify our system so that we can take coal or natural gas and produce syngas actually. And then from syngas, you can use a traditional method called the MTG system to produce methanol. So that would be coal to liquids. And then, methanol, or MTG produces gasoline. So that's coal to liquid. Right. The MTG process is a process by Shell or Exxon to produce from basically takes methanol or syngas to gasoline. So
converting coal to gasoline?
it's possible, yes.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it actually is possible, and we actually do research on this. So.
It doesn't, but once it's gasoline and gets in the car, obviously it's still going to produce the.
Yes.
Okay.
So the all CCUS does not solve the transportation issue. I think it only more focuses on the power electricity generation, which is where most of the coal is burned. So it would still, and I think most people in the CC or the carbon regulation areas is looking at more bigger point sources rather than trying to control each car, but because it's the largest producer.
Could something like that be retrofitted into a car to do a similar process? Because we have O2 sensors going into our.
Yeah, I think so.
Right now.
I think I think the concept is all there. To just bring it to reality.
Just have to figure out swap it.
Yeah, how to bring that, and people have talked about designing such a concept on a really small scale, because ours is quite big, but our goals were different. Ours is for power plants, and
Yeah.
so, and I really do think so. So, any other?
Thanks so much for coming to our class. This is really great.
Learned something.
I did. I learned a bunch of stuff. So I got to ask you, where in Brazil were you?
let's-
I lived in Brazil for a couple of years.
oh, I was in do you know where Domel is?
So what?
It's like a